Ladies and gentlemen, the GeForce RTX 20 series. Computer graphics reinvented. Aww. Developers all over the world are working hard on RTXing. We're going to have all kinds of amazing games coming your way.
Yeah, that was August of 2018 when the RTX 20 series launched. We were promised a large library of games to support ray tracing and a more realistic lighting environment that just works. But the general consensus right now is that RTX on equals FPS off, as perfectly shown in this game from 1997 where everything is ray traced, but still we cannot hit 60 FPS. But it's 2020 now, and I want to explore the current state of RTX in games and whether or not it is as groundbreaking as we were led to believe in terms of the whole visual experience, but also what it has done to performance. I've already done detailed analysis for Metro Exodus and BF5 when they were launched. Welcome to check out that content. I'll still be including them in this video to give us a refresh, plus many other games that support ray tracing. So in this video, we'll do a visual analysis of all current ray trace games on the market, we'll do performance testing, and see what the overall experience this very expensive technology delivers after this.
The NMAX T50 Axe air cooler now comes in this gorgeous white finish with an addressable RGB high pressure fan along with a patented air guide grill to increase airflow. The Vortex differential fin design helps increase air convection around the heat pipes so that your CPU can stay nice and cool. Learn more in the description down below.
Alright, so the first thing I need to clarify with RTX are two forms of implementation. So the first being are games that have some form of ray tracing, whether it be ray trace shadows, global illumination, or reflections, and all of which aim to provide the most realistic lighting environment, and this is the part that Jensen was talking about as just works.
Everything just works. Everything just works because ray tracing just works.
Because game designers don't have to fake lighting inside a room, for example. If you have ray traced lighting, the engine does the whole thing for you. And the second thing with RTX is DLSS, which is deep learning super sampling, which aims to improve performance by upsampling lower resolution to your native resolution. The downside here is training the algorithm and seeing what needs to be sharpened in a particular game, and so that takes time, as you'll see later in the video. But I really want to start with the fun stuff first. Let's explore my favorite RTX titles, Metro Exodus and Control. So let's take Control and see what they've done right. And first of all, game context and level design must complement ray traced reflections, as with Control, we have large open areas with glass walls and all types of appropriately glossy surfaces like wood paneling, floor tiles, and lots of marble, all of which work beautifully to create realistic reflections that you will notice throughout the game. So not only are you visible from these glass reflections, but whatever is behind you as well. And I find this example with RTX on just beautiful, as the fire extinguisher, the top light strip, and the door frame are all ray traced very well. However, it's not perfect, as all glass surfaces act as almost like transparent mirrors and lose that hazy texture. That's my only complaint with this game. Other examples of ray traced reflections include BF5, which you'll notice in really shiny, polished, destroyed cars on the street, and mainly in puddles too, that in my experience is unnecessary even for single player because how fast the gameplay is. But you can see fire, smoke, and ricochets all properly reflecting from this puddle, while the RTX off reflections are pixelated and overall less realistic. And I really think pacing is important for ray tracing to matter, as I've been exploring another game called Deliver Us the Moon, in which reflections are ray traced and we can see our character reflecting in pretty much all the glass surfaces, which is great because not having anything reflecting looks kind of weird, but it's kind of the same transparent mirror effect as we saw in Control, where glass loses texture and also kind of looks off. For example, imagine having the glass texture of the left image with the reflections of the right. I think that would be the most realistic scenario. Now here's a weird example where some objects are not rendered in our reflections, like the monitor should be visible with RTX on, but in fact the RTX off looks more realistic because of that particular element. And one more example where you can see the character reflecting off the glass surface in front of us, but the spacesuit behind the glass isn't rendered properly in the reflection of that blue tile. I've also seen this in the game called Bright Memory, where there's this massive puddle outside the elevator, but only the light shape is properly rendered, where the rest of the scene inside the puddle actually looks better with RTX off. And this game is still in early access, so I won't bother with it too much, but I mean, this is the opening level, and having these things not working as they should is, yeah, worrying. So those are the 4 games that currently support ray traced reflections, as far as I know. Not a large sample size, and only Control has them figured out. I feel like it fits the game context and level design, while it does give you a better reflection job of like seeing your character and Deliver Us the Moon, but some things are not working properly as they should, and it throws the whole thing off. Now let's take a look at Metro Exodus, where global illumination is ray traced, another title that I think benefits greatly with ray tracing. Here's a scene illuminated by a single exterior light source, the sun, thus making all shadowy areas properly dark, unlike that flat look with RTX off. Now global illumination with this game means a more realistic environment that complements the whole apocalyptic level design, so all the light sources have a more realistic roll-off. This scene in the train, for example, is lit up by a single lamp to my right, giving us a very dark but properly rendered train car, while RTX off is still moody and dark, but lacks the natural contrast the lamp should create. While going outdoors, I found this example really interesting, as the snow with RTX on just gets much brighter because of that bright skybox that actually gives us more detail in the helmet of the soldier, and again, better contrast in areas that aren't receiving as much light, like his left side. If you have the means to play Metro with ray tracing enabled, I highly recommend it. Especially the end levels are beautifully done in terms of light, contrast, shadows, and dark areas that ray tracing really kind of like sums it up together for a beautiful atmosphere. And the last ray traced implementation we can talk about are shadows. So the latest Call of Duty Modern Warfare is awesome, and I finished the single player campaign without realizing that I had RTX enabled, and that's because ray traced shadows is probably the least exciting RTX technology in my opinion. The shadows are soft, yet the lighting is very harsh anyway, plus no shadow for our digital Fred, come on. While other scenes look more realistic with RTX off because ray traced shadows become just too soft and difficult to notice, like with this corner and the yellow washing bucket. Plus, after you're done with the campaign, who else goes into the graphics settings and turns everything to minimum? I mean, this is a multiplayer game, so I'm all about giving me the best FPS and least visual clutter. And finally, we have Shadow of the Tomb Raider. As the name suggests, we have ray traced shadows, and in 2 words, this implementation is disappointing still. I mean, we waited for over a year after the game launched to finally have RTX support, and it doesn't even look that good. So many shadows in the environment get so soft by the time they hit the surface that they lose all contextual meaning, while there's very little visual difference between closer objects getting hit by my flashlight, regardless if RT is enabled. Perhaps in this scene, the shadows from the wall are properly cast, but RTX off already looks very good. I think global illumination with shadows would be a much better visual sell, because even with properly rendered shadows, everything in this scene is so flat that I simply lose appreciation for ray traced proper shadows. Now let's come back to a very special throwback, Quake 2 RTX. This is a very special example as everything in the game is ray traced, and that includes shadows, reflections, and global illumination, so obviously it looks better versus the pixel art of 97, but look what it does to performance. And this is a clear example why ray tracing is so difficult, because even with the best hardware and something as visually simple as Quake 2, it is difficult to have full ray tracing and also have some performance. Which, surprise, surprise, brings us to disappointing performance across the board. And it really sucks to have some games like Metro and Deliver Us the Moon literally cutting frame rates in half when RTX is enabled, and less severe performance hits with COD, BF5, Tomb Raider, and surprisingly Bright Memory 2, which is still in early access, and this is all with a 2080 Ti. There's something that really needs to be called out here too, and that is how variable performance impacts are in these games. I can see BF5, Metro, and Control needing tons of resources since they actually look pretty different with their features enabled, but Modern Warfare and Tomb Raider, I mean, come on, they just feel like terrible optimizations. One thing to note here are all my ray tracing settings were set to maximum, so they're your worst case scenario, and in all of these games, the level of ray tracing can be reduced to lower performance impact, but you also end up sacrificing the features you end up paying for when it comes to RTX, so think about that. Now, when we bring in the lower tier RTX 2060 on board, performance hit is actually consistent to what we saw with the 2080 Ti per game. Quite bad, especially in Control and Metro, but you could get away playing them with ray tracing enabled and some visual settings toned down, which I think is worth it. Which brings me to DLSS, or Deep Learning Super Sampling, and my opinion and its performance and implementation has changed since its first launch, which is a good thing. In the beginning with BF5 and Metro Exodus, it made everything too soft, we lost too much detail, but now it has greatly improved. So on BF5, the overall image is still sharp and only the smaller details like tree leaves and the fine texture on a soldier get slightly smoother, but performance is so worth it. I tested this with the RTX 2060, which is how you're able to play Metro with ultra ray tracing preset, as we gain over 10 FPS, and actually think it makes the image sharper with DLSS enabled, which again was not the case when it first launched. In Control, the image to me looks identical. This is with the highest settings, but on the left, I had the render resolution set to 1080p to give me a little bit extra playable frame rates, while DLSS delivers a much better performance and still a very similar image. Unfortunately, while in game you do lose a bit of detail in the distance and textures are not loading until you get closer, which is just not very pretty. As for Deliver Us the Moon, performance is greatly improved and image sharpening is present with a tiny loss of sharper edges around text, for example, but at 1440p, which I tested all these games at, DLSS is a must for ray tracing while getting a nice performance boost as well. So DLSS definitely has potential, but as with ray tracing rollout, I feel like it's going to be a waiting game and I feel like it's going to be a long one. So BF5 and Metro Exodus look much better now than they did a year ago when the DLSS was first launched, and that whole year of training has definitely paid off, but I feel like we're never gonna get like the sharper, best DLSS possible at launch of certain games, and that's kind of disappointing. Something else I should mention is that ray tracing was unlocked on GTX cards as well, but without dedicated tensor cores, it's more of a tease as performance absolutely tanks. Not recommended even on some powerful cards. I will leave on a positive note because we have so many exciting games coming out in 2020 that promise ray tracing. Potentially not at launch, but sometime in the future, and at least that's kind of exciting. But until performance is not cut in half, I think we should remain skeptical. I'm Dmitry, thanks so much for watching. Let me know if you've tried ray tracing and what's your experience been like. Do you like the visual, or is it kind of like a meh? Shadows are not my thing, global illumination looks great, and reflections only in certain games. As usual, this whole video has been ray traced fully. I hope you appreciate that. I'm Dmitry, thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you in the next video. Whew.